Okay, hello everybody. Let's start with a first presentation of the conference. I am beyond honored to welcome Paul Julian Smith back home, back to the institution where he taught for almost 20 years and where he made a critical impact on so many students and colleagues, and critically contributed to making Cambridge one of the world epicenters of Hispanisms. Mentioning the extraordinary number of publications, awards, and merits of this internationally recognized critic in Hispanic cultural studies and critical theory would not do justice to how influential Paul's work has been to many of us. Elected a Fellow of the British Academy in 2008, his interests are wide-ranging and interdisciplinary, and that can be seen in his prolific career. He is the author, if I am not miscounting, of 25 books, and so far, I'm counting, and over 100 academic articles, many of which are considered groundbreaking works. Some of his latest books are Queer Mexico, Cinema and Television since 2000, published in 2017, Spanish and Latin American television drama, genre and foreign translation, Multi-platform media in Mexico, growth and change since 2010, Mexican gender, Mexican genres, cinema, television, and streaming since 2010, published in 2021. Many of you will know of his enormous contributions in the study of visual culture in the Hispanic world. As the Spanish film critic for the British Film Institute's Sight and Sound magazine, Smith wrote dozens of reviews, and as the author of Desire Unlimited, the cinema of Pedro Almodóvar, which is a critical work that has been published with different editions, earned a reputation as the major world scholar on the films by the Spanish director. Smith went beyond the field of cinema in contemporary Spanish culture, TV, fashion, art, and film in 2003 to examine cultural areas that received less academic attention. His 2007 work, Spanish Visual Culture, Cinema, Television, Internet, explores emotion, location, and nostalgia in each of these media. And in Reimagining History in Contemporary Spanish Media, one of his most recent works, published in 2021, he addresses, through internationally successful TV shows such as Veneno, Vis-a-Vis, or La Casa de Papel, how visual culture reimagines history for the contemporary Spanish media audiences. Personally, I am proud to call Paul a friend and a mentor. One of my first memories as an undergraduate student was picking up a copy of his groundbreaking monograph, Laws of Desire, Questions of Homosexuality in Spanish Writing and Film, 1960 to 1990, which has been shown just in the previous panel. It had just been published in its Spanish translation at the time, if I'm not mistaken, in 1998, which is when I started my undergraduate career. At that time, having just turned 18 and coming from a small town and turbulent past, so to speak, I did not even know that queer cultural analysis was an epistemological possibility. And reading Paul's work felt like opening the door of a world that I had never imagined before. Through his guidance, I read Juan Goiti Solo and Step to Sketch for the first time. I discovered the films of Eloy de la Iglesia and even a side of Almodóvar cinema of which I was unaware. Paul also introduced me to the existence of scholars that had discussed non-normative desires and gender identities. Through Laws of Desire, I heard for the first time about Jonathan Dollimore and Eve Kosowski-Sedgwick, about Judith Butler and David Halperin. I read Paul's sharp analysis of Spanish cultural pieces as eagerly as I would a mystery novel, believing that what he did was something I wanted to do. I wanted to inspire people in the future the way he inspired me. Many years later, I got to meet Paul after one of the many brilliant lectures he has delivered throughout his career, that time at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. I was at that time working at the Teatre Nacional de Catalunya, yet considering returning to academia. That day, Paul and I started a personal and intellectual conversation that had lasted, thankfully, until today. And hopefully we go on.
Yeah,
it is for these reasons that I am particularly proud that Paul, currently distinguished professor in the comparative literature program at the Graduate Center in the City University of New York, is our first keynote speaker at the Queer Hispanisms Now conference. Welcome back to Cambridge, Paul. Welcome back home. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Can you hear me like this? My voice is a bit rough. I'm hoping it's sexy, but it's just for flight. But I'll attempt to be sexy. So it's thank you to all of the organizers for this wonderful event, and it's so moving, really. I may be crying later. Moving to be back home, as Isaías said, and to see so many old friends and also new friends, I think. I'm delighted by the invitation. I've really had such a beautiful introduction. Thank you. So I have no moving pictures. I'm the only moving thing. I also realized I have no printed words. They're just images. Jeffrey, I didn't see you. It's so fantastic that Jeffrey's here. That you're all here. Okay, let's get started. Let me just make sure. Yeah, so. So you may not know this film. You probably know the next film. The first section is called From Mexico to Madrid. It's Saturday morning, and I'm sitting on the bed in my hotel room in Mexico City. Picture it. It's a beautiful picture. This is the time slot where Televisa, still the dominant broadcaster, shows an old movie, typically featuring one of the local child stars of the 1970s or 80s. This time, it's different. I watch a scene where a modest Mexican nun visits a sexy Spanish showgirl in her dressing room. Reflected in a mirror framed by light bulbs typical of that charged location, the odd couple engage in an ambivalent dialogue which reveals an unlikely and intimate affinity. I am struck by the similarity of this unknown film to another with which I am much more familiar. This film. Inspired by two chance encounters, the nun with the showgirl, me with the film, this lecture offers close readings of four apparently diverse audiovisual works in feature film and limited series. It argues that when subjected to the kind of meticulous and patient examination recommended by Foucault, they could be read as a kind of palimpsest in which ghostly traces of the queer are glimpsed over some 5 decades. My corpus has two examples each of two genres, urban comedy, which you see behind me, and rural tragedy. The film I stumbled over in my hotel is Mariano Ozores' popular farce, which is known in Mexico as Sor Metiche, and in Spain as, bless you, unos granujas decentes. So I have to confess, I didn't know the meaning of either of those words. Which you must watch more TV and you'll learn Spanish, because I'm learning Spanish. So, Sor Metiche is itself a remake of his own Una Monja y un Don Juan, 1973. It anticipates surprisingly closely Almodóvar's black comedy cum melodrama Entre Tinieblas of 1983. In its premise of an economically failing convent and its juxtaposition of a sister and a showgirl. Meanwhile, Mario Camus' prestige literary adaptation Los Santos Inocentes, 1984, located in an, I'm not sure if I have a picture here, no I don't, more Sor Metiche. Mario Camus' Los Santos Inocentes, 1984, located in an upper-class Franquist household whose pursuit of hunting is evidently emblematic, is reframed by Mexican gay director Manolo Caro as the more explicit Netflix original Alguien tiene que morir from 2020. So this 3-part series is set in a similarly toxic family in the brutal early Francoist period, shot in Spain by a Mexican director. That's why the talk, I didn't say what the name of the talk was. The talk is called Mexicans in Madrid, Ozores and Almodóvar, Camus and Caro. Despite their different tones and genres, the texts of my 4 works depict the same socio-political issues of religion, repression, and sexuality. And their production and reception raise 4 general questions of respectively popular culture, auteurism, the middle brow, and screen fiction in an age of digital distribution. Moreover, the theme of the Mexican visitor to Spain, central to the first and last of my texts, raises the further vital question of the transnational. So how do I deal with this? Seeking to go beyond naive genetic criticism or empirical cultural history, this chapter, I give myself a word, this lecture, you could just read the book. I'll go for another walk and I just got lost outside, but I made it back. Cambridge is changing all the time. This is what they don't know about Cambridge. It's very modern. No, it is. It just keeps changing and updating. This chapter dialogues with Foucault's well-known essay, Nietzsche, Genealogy, History of 1971, and his less familiar fragmentary writings on film, compiled in 2011 as Foucault va au cinéma, which I think is now in English also. In the latter, mainly interviews with the critics of Cahiers du Cinéma, Foucault responds to a cycle of fiction films of the mid-70s, often queer themes like Salo, Pasolini 1974, and The Night Porter, Cavani, also 1974. In his view, these period films falsely eroticize fascism and Nazism. And he comments more positively on 2 rural tragedies films, which reveal rather the desire for power by young men. The austere cinematic adaptation of a real-life rural tragedy whose genealogy he himself had documented, that of the multiple murderer in Moi, Pierre, Rivière by René Alliot in 1976, and the fiction feature on an accidental adherent to the Gestapo in occupied France, Louis Malle's La Tombe Lucien in 1974. So following Foucault, and in the published version, there's a lot more reference to Foucault, which will make it clearer. This lecture, I got it right there. This lecture will argue for a genealogy. There's been so many talks on archive and genealogy, so I hope I'm contributing to that communal project. A genealogy which is intimately attached to the body, and most especially to the ingestion of food, and for a historical cinema and a history of cinema that is, in Foucault's phrase again, anti-retro, avoiding the facile consolations of nostalgia and self-recognition in the past. Okay, that's just an introduction. I'm going to have to read much faster to get through this. No, we'll see how we go. So the second section is called Ozores and its origin, and these are all terms that Foucault takes from Nietzsche in the original German. Mariano Ozores, Francoism's prolific director of some 99 comedies. Why did he stop at 99? Because Spanish cinema changed and he could no longer get funding, that's why. Is known for a coarse costumbrismo that now feels marooned in the distant past. In sort of metiche, the still timid social and sexual transformations of the transition. We had the proto-destape, no? This is kind of proto-destape, are embodied here in the figure of Barbara Rey, known as the queen of the destape, and as a waitress working in a topless bar, who is also a gangster's mole. It could happen. There is a clear, perhaps proto-lesbian complicity now between the feisty nun and the newly proactive showgirl, the showgirl proclaims she is no longer a mujer objeto, because now women have the same rights as men. And as a proud feminist, she supports Sor Metiche by this is rather complicated, forcing the criminal gang led by her lover to return the haul they've stolen from the impoverished convent. If you just think of Entre Tinieblas, you'll more or less follow the plot. So the bankrupt nuns are saved from the clutches of a bumbling count in Entre Tinieblas, it's a Marqueso, and his crafty assistant, who is actually named Almodóvar in the film. The villainous pair has sought to evict the nuns and make a profit speculating with their Madrid property. A further palimpsest here is the trace of reception in the twin countries of this rare co-production. So I'll try to say a little about production and reception as I go. Sor Metiche was funded by Televisa's feature film division Televisine. Unlike in the original National Catholic version where the nun never sings, a key attraction in the transnational remake is music. Here is Sor Metiche arriving at Barajas. Here is, you may mention, Lina Morgan, who's in the original version and who does not sing. And here we see the Mexican actress Maria Victoria singing. She's known as a singer. And this scene is very similar to the scene at the end of Entre Tinieblas where Yolanda sings against a sparkly backdrop. Now, the ever smiling Maria Victoria, I think probably unknown in Spain, had long been a major comedian and singing star in Mexico, known, this is something else, but this is the showing the co-production. Here you see her singing, it looks like standard music, doesn't it? But this is what Maria Victoria looks like in Mexico. It's kind of different to how she looked when she went to Spain. She was known for essential versions of local genres such as bolero and ranchera. Here she is given 3 set-piece numbers of somewhat saccharine Christian pop. So it must have come as a shock to Mexican audiences if they saw these films, and Televisine films were popular, to see her hourglass figure, normally displayed in strapless lurex gowns, hidden by the modest nun's habit. National stereotype cuts both ways in Sor Metiche. Maria Victoria, only just arrived at Barajas, is treated to a motorized guided tour of the capital's tourist sites, as you can see here. Here they are. This credit sequence is no doubt intended for Mexican audiences who will enjoy its postcard shots of a foreign capital. Meanwhile, in the coarsest comedy sequence of the film, Sor Metiche adds just a little chile to the system's all-rice diet. This causes predictable gastric havoc in the sheltered nun's digestive system. But the point is, this kind of group dining scene is very similar to Almodóvar, but it suggests the bodily connection between digestion, identity, and community at a time when Chile was probably not so well known in Madrid as it is today. So, beyond the grand narrative of social and sexual change which is glimpsed here, a showgirl suddenly sure of her rights as an outspoken feminist, the transnational comedy attaches itself, like Foucault's genealogy, to the little story of the body, to its multiple functions and trials. So one odd sequence survives in both versions of the film. It is of an old man who resists a medical injection in the buttocks from the nun, because he claims to fear maricones as he bends over the kitchen table. So this is very coarse humour, of course. But it is perhaps surprising that a film like this unsurprising that a film like this with 2 titles and 2 production companies, 2 nations, should, like Foucault's model of genealogy, derive from dissenting sources. And if Ozores' main aim is to parody the pious religious film that stretches back at least to Marcelino Pan y Vino in 1955, of which more later, he and his faithful audience can now afford to laugh at such solemn origins. So this stands for me as origin. the Spanish title. The genealogy of film comedy is not, of course, to be taken as unproblematic documentary evidence for political transition or socio-cultural change. But the archives of Francoist and post-Francoist comedy have here become tangled reels of celluloid, erased and overwritten. These are all quotes from Foucault. In the short space of time between the two versions of the same unlikely story. And the Mexican characters in Ozores' auto remake, religious and criminal, indigestible and unpronounceable, are the sign of a new emergent subject which we might call queer. They don't quite fit in Madrid. So, Almodóvar as descent. So what I've argued then is that origin is problematized in Ozores' Sor Metiche, which is a part Mexican remake from the transition that is in constant silent dialogue with its Francoist predecessor, the film starring Lina Morgan. It's not Mexican. In Almodóvar's Entre Tinieblas, so is descent problematized. Foucault defines descent as, quote, the accidents, the minute deviations, or conversely, the complete reversals, the errors, the first false appraisals, and the faulty calculations that gave birth to those things that continue to exist and have value for us, end quote. So it's rather moving, I find that phrase. He continues in a felicitous nod to our religious context. Of course, his piece is a general theoretical piece. He says, this is undoubtedly why every origin of morality, from the moment it stops being pious, and Herkunft, descent, can never be pious, has value as a critique. So you see how this might relate to Entre Tinieblas, the convent comedy. Now, in early interviews, Almodóvar cites a family resemblance between Entre Tinieblas and the Hollywood melodrama of Douglas Sirk. I myself once claimed, actually in my inaugural lecture in the University of Cambridge, a common ancestry for Almodóvar's convent melodrama in the secular world of cloistered women in Lorca's La Casa de Bernarda Alba. Here I'll argue rather for the film's close connection with the low-brow Iberian sex comedies such as those of Ozores. The accident that gave birth to Sor Metiche, remember Foucault talks about accidents in this process of descent, was rare co-funding with Mexican behemoth Televisa. I'm not aware of any other co-production from Televisa coming to Spain. The faulty calculation that gestated Entre Tinieblas was the Almodóvar's brothers' collaboration with the now forgotten production house Tesauro. This is before they had El Deseo. Tesauro's boss insisted on his wife, Cristina Sanchez Pascual, being cast as the central chanteuse, which I believe in America is pronounced chanteuse, which is fine. Anyway, you may remember there's a central, this is the Marquesas, but we'll come back to her, Marica Reggio. Almodóvar has claimed that the deficiencies in Sanchez's performance style led to a shift in narrative focus during the shoot. The relatively affectless showgirl was meant to be the star. I'll show a picture of her in a minute, to the intensely amorous lesbian mother superior, played by the wonderful Julian Serrano. So this is my little bit of archival work. When I had the opportunity to consult two faded versions of the unpublished script in the archives of El Deseo in Madrid, script versions of Entre Tinieblas. And at that point, Almodóvar would write, they were like little novels, and they would tell you about the things that would normally be a script, like the motivations of what the characters were thinking.